Hey guys, Mr. G here. In this video, we're going to fill in the rest of the unit circles by writing out the x and y coordinates for all the degrees in the second quadrant, third quadrant, and fourth quadrant. All right? Now in the latest video, we figured out the x and y coordinates in the first quadrant for 30, 45, and 60 degrees. And in the video prior to that, we were able to figure out the x and y coordinate for the 90-degree angle measurements. So if we take a look in the first quadrant, we have 30 degrees, which is root 3 over 2, comma 1/2. For 45 degrees, we have root 2 over 2, comma root 2 over 2. And 60 degrees, we have 1/2, comma root 3 over 2. Now my x and y coordinates for all the degrees in quadrants 2, 3, and 4 are going to have similar x and y coordinates that are in the first quadrant. All right. Now, what I'm going to do to try to fill in the rest of the unit circle is in each quadrant, I'm going to calculate my reference angle, and whatever reference angle I'm going to use a copy and paste format. So let's say we calculated the reference angle for 150 degrees. I'm going to get one of these 3 angle measurements. So let's say if my reference angle for 150 is 30 degrees. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a copy and paste format. So I'm going to copy this x and y coordinate that's in 30 degrees and paste it on the same spot for 150 degrees. All right? So I'm going to do that for all of the degrees. So before we do that, let's recall reference angles. Now, reference angles, if you remember, it's an acute angle and it's positioned on the terminal side of the angle measurement and the nearest x-axis. So we're either going to be subtracting by or from 180 degrees or 360 degrees. All right, so let's start trying to figure out the reference angles in quadrant 2 to fill in the x and y coordinates. All right, so we have all of the angles in quadrant 2, 120, 135, and 150. And we see that it's near 180 degrees for the x-axis. All right, so for each angle measurement in quadrant 2, I'm going to take 180 and subtract it to one of these angle measurements. So let's start with 150 degrees. So if I take 180 and subtract it to 150, I get 30 degrees. All right, so my reference angle for 150 degrees is 30 degrees. So I'm going to take my purple pen and I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to paste it in the same spot for 150 degrees. All right, so we have, we have root 3 over 2, comma 1/2. All right, so I copied the x and y coordinate from 30 degrees to the same spot as 150 degrees. Now, let's take a look at the position in the second quadrant. Now we're looking on the left side of the x-axis and the upward direction of the y-axis. Now, based on the position, the left side represents the negative side. So that means that my x values in my second quadrant are going to be negative. So this root 3 over 2 is going to be a negative, while the 1/2 stays as a positive. So now let's try to figure out the reference angles for the rest of the 2 angle measurements in quadrant 2. So I have 180 degrees, subtract that to 135. I get a 45-degree angle measurement as my reference angle for 135. So I'm going to copy my x and y coordinate for 45 degrees and paste it into the same spot as 135. So I have root 2 over 2, comma root 2 over 2. And now if you recall, my x value is going to be a negative. All right? Now, and better yet, let me shade the terminal side based on the reference angle. So for 135 is going to be a red, since 45 is labeled as with a red pen. And then for 150, I'm gonna shade it as purple. Okay? So now let's take a look at 120 degrees. So if I were to do 180 minus 120, I get 60 degrees. All right, so I'm gonna take my blue pen and I'm gonna copy the X and Y coordinate from 60 degrees and paste it in the same spot as 120 degrees. So I have 1/2 comma root 3 over 2. And my X value is going to be a negative, and we're going to color code 120 with a blue pen. All right, so now we did that for quadrant 2. We're gonna do this, we're gonna do the copy and paste format in quadrant 3 and in quadrant 4. I'm gonna copy the X and Y coordinates from quadrant 1 and paste it in quadrant 3 or 4. So now let's go from quadrant 2 to quadrant 3. Now for quadrant 3, we have the angle measurements that are past 180 degrees. But if we take a look, we see that 180 degrees is still the nearest side of the x-axis. So to figure out my reference angle for these following 3, I'm going to take the angle and subtract it to 180. So let's start off with 210 degrees. So I have 210 degrees, subtract that to 180 degrees, I get 30 degrees. So I'm gonna take my purple pen and copy the X and Y coordinate for 30 degrees and paste it in the same spot as 210. All right. So I have root 3 over 2, comma, 1/2. Now, if you take a look at the position in quadrant 3, I'm going in a downward direction for my y-axis, and I'm going on the left, and I'm still on the left side of the x-axis. And both of those sides represent the negative side. So both my x and y coordinates are going to be negative values. So I have negative root 3 over 2, comma, negative 1/2. All right? So now let's do this. Oh, and I'm going to shade it with the purple. So let me shade this. All right. So now I'm going to do the same thing for 225 degrees. So I'm going to take 225, subtract that to 180 degrees, and I get 45 degrees. All right. So I'm going to copy the X and Y coordinate 45 and paste it in the same spot for 225 degrees. So I have root 2 over 2, comma, root 2 over 2. And both of my X and Y coordinates are going to be negative. And I'm going to shade this with the red. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do the same thing for 240 degrees. All right, so if I do 240 minus 180, I get 60 degrees. So my reference angle for 240 is 60 degrees. So I'm going to copy this X and Y coordinate from 60 degrees and paste it into here. So I have 1/2, comma, root 3 over 2. And both of my X and Y coordinates are negative. And I'm going to color coordinate. Oh, excuse me. Color coordinates over here. Okay. So we have my X and Y coordinates in quadrant 2 and quadrant 3. Let's wrap this up by filling out the X and Y coordinates in quadrant 4. Now in quadrant 4, we have these. We have 300, 315, and 330 degrees. And the nearest x-axis is the 360 degrees. So to figure out my reference angle, I'm going to take each X and Y coordinate and all right, so I'm going to take 360 and subtract it to each degree in the fourth quadrant. So let's say if I were to do, starting off with 330. So I have 360 minus 330. I get a 30 degree angle measurement. So that means that my reference angle for 330 degrees is 30 degrees. So I'm going to take my purple pen and I'm going to copy the X and Y coordinate in 30 degrees and paste it in here. All right, so I have root 3 over 2, comma, 1/2. Now, if we were to take a look at the position in the fourth quadrant, we're now on the right side of the x-axis, but we're still in the downward direction for the y-axis. So my y value is going to be a negative. All right, color coordinate this with purple. So now let's go ahead and try to figure out the reference angle for 315. So I have 360 minus 315. I get 45 degrees. So my x and y coordinate for 315 is going to be similar to 45 degrees. So I'm going to copy this over here and paste it on the same spot as 315 degrees. So I have root 2 over 2, comma, root 2 over 2. Now my y value is going to be the negative. All right, shade this over here. All right, so now we're going to do the same thing with 300 degrees. So if I were to take 360 and subtract it to 300, I get 60 degrees. So my reference angle for 300 is 60 degrees. So I'm going to right click my mouse, copy the x and y coordinates over here, and paste it over here. Let me see, can you see? So y coordinates, almost. Okay, so this one is going to be 1/2, comma, root 3 over 2. All right, and then remember, my y value is going to be a negative. All right, just actually cross this out. So now, and then I'm going to shade this. All right, so now we were able to fill out all of my x and y coordinates in the unit circle. Now, if you take a look in the unit circle, we were able to figure out the x and y coordinates for the unit circle by just using the x and y coordinates from quadrant 1, all right? If you guys still have any questions, you can feel free to email me. Hope you guys have a wonderful day.